Every day when I do my dog walk, I like to stop here and look at the building work that's going on behind me. And in the past year or so, I've seen it change from fields to roads to foundations to actual houses appearing on this land. Now, I don't know much about buildings, but everything I do know, I probably picked up from watching the Channel 4 programme Grand Designs. Now, if you haven't seen this TV series, well, it started in 1999, presented by architect and designer Kevin MacLeod, and it's gone for 21 seasons. And it follows the trials and tribulations, the ups and downs of people trying to build their dream home. And these aren't just any old home, these are elaborate and over-the-top designs. Now, each of those designs are different, but what they all have in common is a dream, a vision, a picture, a purpose of what these houses, these buildings are going to be for their owners. And despite the ups and downs, despite the way the designs may change or the materials have to be adapted, what remains constant is the vision that these owners have, the dream that they have. And it's possibly that dream that keeps them going through all the adversity and the struggles that they may face in the process of building their dream home. And the other thing that each of these homes have in common is that they are not just small, they are grand designs. They're over the top, they're big, they're elaborate, they're unusual. They don't settle for second best or pre-packaged bought on the internet houses. These are something different. These are something imaginative. These are pushing the limits of architecture. Now, God had a grand design. He had a dream. He had a vision of his own. And this wasn't a building, this involved people. And it was messy and it was exciting and it wasn't small. It was a grand design where God took a bunch of people and he called them his people, and he used them to reflect his character, the character of the architect, the character of God. And what we have through the Old Testament is a story of this people, of this grand design. But what we see is this people losing their way. They forget what their purpose was. They have ups and downs, trials and tribulations, but they forget what the vision was, what the dream was that God had for these people, that they would be a shining example, a light to the nations, that they would be representatives of God in the world. And what we find when we come later on in the Old Testament is that because these people were so disobedient, because these people have forgotten their purpose, God removes his protection from them. And the massive Babylonian Empire invades Jerusalem, the city of these people, the Israelites. And they destroy their walls, they destroy God's temple, and they take the majority of that population into captivity and take them into exile to the city of Babylon. And so you have God's people in a strange land, surrounded by foreigners with strange customs. And in the Psalms, you get an insight into the way they are feeling. In Psalm 137, it shares these words that were immortalized by the band Boney M. By the rivers of Babylon, as we lay down, yea, we weep when we remember Zion. Zion was another name for Jerusalem. They weep as they remember those things that they have lost. They weep as they try and contemplate what it is to be foreigners in a land that is not their own, customs that are not their own, restrictions to what they can and can't do, and restrictions to the way that they worship. And in verse 4 of that same Psalms, they say the words, they ask the question, how can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? How could they be God's people and worship God when they can't do those things that they once did. They haven't even got the temple where God resided and where they worshipped and brought their sacrifices to him. And perhaps this is how you've been feeling this past year over lockdown with all the restrictions. And perhaps for you, your faith has really suffered and struggled because you haven't been able to do those things that you once did. Going to church every Sunday, maybe attending your home groups. And you've been left with that question, how do I sing the Lord's song? How do I worship? How do I live out my faith in this time of restrictions where I can't do those things I once did? Maybe you have struggled. And if you have, then that's fine, because I've struggled. Most of us have struggled to work out what does it mean to be God's people? What does it mean to be a follower of Jesus at this hugely difficult and restrictive time? Now, for the nation of Israel, they were in exile, but God continued to speak to them in the midst of their imprisonment. And he used prophets who would share what God had spoken to them, to the people of Israel. And they shared with these people in exile that there is hope. There would be a time when they would return to Jerusalem, to Zion. They would be able to worship God once again in the temple. And Isaiah, one of the prophets, promises that. But he also reminds them something hugely important. He reminds them of their original purpose, God's dream for his people. He says these words from God in Isaiah 49 verse 6. It is too small a thing for you to be my servant, to restore the tribes of Jacob and bring back those of Israel I have kept. Isaiah is saying, yes, there is hope. Yes, you will be returning to Jerusalem. You will be returning to those old ways of life. You will be able to once again worship God in your land. But that is too small a thing to just do that, to just take you back to what you once were. And he goes on to say, I will also make you a light for the Gentiles, that's the non-Jews, that my salvation may reach to the ends of the earth. See, through Isaiah, God is reminding that nation of Israel, those exiles, that they have a purpose, that there is a grand design, and that it's too small a thing just to return to doing what they once were, because what they once were was failing. It wasn't good enough. They weren't being who God had designed them, called them to be. That now is the time for them to remember, to be reminded of what they are there to do. And that is to be a blessing to the world and a light to the entire population of the world, showing them what it means to be a citizen of God's kingdom. And likewise for us, there is hope. We will return to church services together on a Sunday morning. We will return to meeting as home groups. There will come an end to this pandemic. But it is too small a thing just to go back to what we once were, to go back to the normal routines, the way of doing things, because it wasn't working. On Facebook, I saw this quote, it's nothing should go back to normal. Normal wasn't working. If we go back to the way things were, we will have lost the lesson. May we rise up and do better. I think that's great. May we rise up and do better as we prepare ourselves to return to some form of normality, back to physical meetings in the church building. May we rise up and do better. May we remember the grand design that God has for us. You see, Jesus reminds us in Matthew of that vision, that dream that God had for his people, to be a light, to not be hidden, to be salt, to be different and distinctive, to set an example. And then before he ascended back to heaven, he called his disciples to go out into all the world, to disciple, to teach, to baptize, to tell people about Jesus Christ. And we continue the legacy of Jesus, the legacy of those disciples, to make Jesus known, to bring people into relationship with Jesus, to disciple them, to baptize them. That is the calling that God has placed on his church. Not a building, but people. Not a small thing, but a grand design. That is our mission. That is our purpose. That is our calling. So as we return, let's not make this about us, what we want, what we like or don't like, what we're expecting from Sunday mornings or from church as we gather together. Let's make it about the people that we are being called to reach out to, the town of Hawley, the community that we reside in, our friends and our neighbours, our family, those people that desperately need to know about Jesus. And that may mean that we will need to do things in a different way. It may mean that we need to step out of our comfort zones. It may mean that when you come to a Sunday service in the building, it won't look like what it once did. It may not be your cup of tea. It may not meet the needs that you have. But it is too small a thing for us to focus on ourselves. God is calling us to something far bigger, far greater, far grander. So as we walk together into unknown territory, as we journey into a new normal, whatever that may mean, let us keep as number one the calling he has on our church, to be a light, a beacon of hope on a hill not hidden but shining brightly in our community for all the world to see.